Hello, happy campers. Back in the day when every neighborhood had a shopping center, in the back of that shopping center was the neighborhood video store. In the back of that video store was where they kept the stories that stood the test of time. These are the back rec videos. Finally back, Spike, Chris, and today we're going to take you through the wonderful world of science.
Science?
Yay!
Science fiction?
Not the science, not science fiction, actual science. Because science fiction has its place, it's a good time, and everybody likes it and everything. But we are talking about sciencey science, not the science. This week we're going to be talking about science TV shows of the past. And it goes back almost to the very beginning of television itself. We'll get into the details in a minute. The two, if I say TV science show, Chris and other people of his generation who grew up in the 90s are going to think of two shows. What are they, Chris?
Bill Nye, the Science Guy.
Disney's entry into the genre, and
BEAKMAN'S
World, which was Deke's introduction into it. They were a French studio. Did like Inspector Gadget and a bunch of other goofy little cartoons and stuff. Both of those were done back in the early 90s in response to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission's educational and informational children's television BS. If they were going to show Batman the animated series, they're going to have to show an episode of something educational / informative. And that's what Bill Nye and BEAKMAN'S World was all about. Chris?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to brush up on your Beakman or your Bill Nye?
Bill Nye, the Science Guy, is probably, I would put him up there with like Mythbusters now, you know? Like he had this way about him of just like, you know, being straightforward, being the straight guy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But also like have fun with the science. Other than like BEAKMAN'S World, that, like, you know, it's like you had a talking rat, you know, and just very kid-like, that made you comfortable.
The guy with the Yahoo Serious hairdo, yeah.
Yeah. Like he kind of reminded me of a probably distant cousin of Doc Brown.
Yeah, I could see that.
Who's
been eating a lot of hallucinogenic mushrooms.
Yes.
He's been shrooming it up. But, yeah, both of them, like I said, they were there for educational and informational purposes. Bill Nye played it straight. Beakman kept his tongue in his cheek while he was doing it. Both of them did a bunch of science factoids and stuff. And if you want to find out more about BEAKMAN'S World or Bill Nye the Science Guy, or if you want to see comparisons of the two, hey, look around you. There are tons of videos on these two shows because, like I said, these are the two shows everybody remembers. What I want to bring up is a bunch of shows a lot of people may have forgotten, such as, let's go get his reaction to this one. Coming out about the same time that as BEAKMAN'S World, and which went into syndication, and Bill Nye, which was pretty much whoever got the Disney afternoon would get them on Sunday mornings. Right around the same time, there was a series on PBS. PBS has a long history of showing science shows. We'll get into that in a minute because we're going to go back in time a little bit here. But right around 1990 or so, 89, late 80s, early 90s, there was a show called Newton's Apple on PBS. And it might be a little bit before this one's time, but Newton's Apple was a science show hosted by Ira Flatow, who is the science correspondent for National Public Radio at the time. Dude looked like a young anorexic Alex Trebek, is basically what he looks like, a cross between Alex Trebek and who's the guy from Welcome Back, Kotter? Yeah, I can't think of his name. Kotter. Let's say Kotter from Welcome Back, Kotter. He's got the mustache and the curly hair and everything. It'll come to me by the end of the show. You'll just see. I've got a brain cell working on it now. But anyway, That one was dedicated more towards an adult audience. It was like a half-hour show, and it came on once a week. And it is the only science show I know to ever have a studio audience. And it's weird as all get out. I'm going to try to insert some clips into this episode. I don't normally, but I'm going to try to insert just a couple of quick clips from each of these shows so you can get an idea of what they look like and stuff and how they handled themselves. You can find a few episodes of Newton's Apple on your favorite video source if you know how to look. Look for NEWTON''S Apple, and you should find some stuff. But Newton's Apple kind of suffered from the same issue that other science shows did. It would find a spot on the menu or on the schedule and stay there for a while, and then all of a sudden just disappear into the ether. Because 1 minute, like we were talking about Beakman's world, 1 minute Beakman is blown up to the point where he has his own strip in the Sunday morning newspaper Funnies, where you can follow along and do science experiments and stuff, and then he's not. So Newton's Apple lasted a couple of years. Out of the three of them, that was my favorite. I actually liked that show because it showed he would do the goofiest things that look goofy and sound goofy, and then when you see it, it's like, wow, how in the world did that happen? Like the time he got somebody to lay down on a bed of nails and then explain the physics behind it. That's a little bit of awesome in its own way.
That's the one that you showed me.
That's the one I showed you to show you what Newton's Apple was about.
That show did go over my head because I've never heard of it until you mentioned it. Like with me, like when it came to covering my education, like other than like most kids, it was like Sesame Street. With me, I had Beakman and Bill Nye, but I had when it came to reading Rainbow, and what's the dog with the
Wishbone?
Wishbone, yes, Wishbone. Those two. Oh, and Ghost Rider. Oh, Ghost Rider.
For me, it was always the Electric Company.
Electric Company.
That was with Easy Reader, and for you youngins out there who don't know what I'm talking about with the Electric Company, you need to look up and just watch an episode of the Electric Company, and your jaw will drop at the names you see popping up on an episode. If you're really good, you'll see Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno and Bill Cosby and you will actually hear Zero Mostel and Joan Rivers, and you'll hear Gene Wilder in the Letterman episodes, not David Letterman, the real Letterman. And it's just, but we're off topic. We're talking about science shows here.
Yeah. It happens when we go down the
rabbit hole. Speaking of children's television workshop shows, though, because that's what the Electric Company was, that's what some of the other reading shows and stuff. The PBS shows, a lot of them done with children's television workshop.
They did a good job.
Children's television workshop, of course, they were the ones who did Sesame Street. They did Electric Company after that. Their follow-up to the Electric Company in 1980 was a little show called 3-2-1 Contact. And a whole bunch of extras' eyes just lit up like, yeah, I remember that show. It's kind of odd because there's actually 3-2-1 Contacts. They did the original show in 1980, and they did 65 episodes because it airs every day. Because we've talked before on this show, if like the Disney Afternoon and the Warner stuff, the Fox Kids stuff, they would do an order for 65 episodes. That's 13 weeks, 5 days a week. And so that's what they did. They did 65 episodes of 3-2-1 Contact. But the ratings were never there, and so the money to support it never really showed up. They didn't make any more episodes for another 3, 4, 5 years, and then all of a sudden they did a bunch of new ones, and then the money ran out, and nobody was really coughing up anymore, and they would go a few more years, and then they'd make a few more episodes, and then it just petered away. But the thing with 3-2-1 Contact, depending upon where you were, they were either in a large room with like windows and stuff, like they were in a sunroom or something, where they would talk about different sciencey things. And they weren't doing scientific experiments, they were talking about scientific principles and the underlying science behind cool things that would happen all around you so that you could understand basic principles in language that a kid would understand, like the Doppler effect, where if you've ever seen an ambulance come up on you, you can hear it get louder and louder until it passes, and then it gets quieter and quieter. That's the Doppler effect. And that's how they can look out whenever you see a weather radar. It depends on the Doppler effect. They explain that in 3, 2, 1 contact, along with a bunch of other things. Like I said, there are 3 different versions. You may have had recurring hosts in the first version, and then you just wound up with a bunch of kids didn't really talk to each other in the second version, and then you didn't really see any kids in the third version. So it lasted for a decade, and nobody really talked to each other between the versions of this show. But one thing that a lot of people do remember is the Bloodhound Gang. Bloodhound Gang was about 3 kids. It was an older girl who was basically the detective of the group, and there was a guy who was about her age, and he was like a newspaper photographer for some reason. And then there was like this precocious 12-year-old kid who was like really overeducated, and they would use scientific principles over to solve mysteries. But it would take, since 3, 2, 1 contact was 5 days a week, their mysteries would be split over 4 episodes. So that each one would be like 7 minutes long. So it would be a half hour every week, but you get 7 minutes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So that's why they always had to show the episodes in the right order, or you would never be able to follow the mystery. But it was essentially Scooby-Doo without the dog meeting CSI, is what the Bloodhound Gang was. That gives you an idea. You can look that one up too, and you'll find all kinds of Bloodhound Gang stuff. Let's go back just before that. Now, of course, the next oldest one is also PBS, and it came around 1970, 71, right around that area, because go back into history a little bit. National Educational Television, NET, was the original educational network for the United States. And boy, oh boy, you think people give PBS a hard time? NET was essentially the communist network. That was the accusation all the time. It was for communists, it was for Marxists, it was all kinds of stuff. In 1970, they shut down NET and started up a new thing called PBS, which was Public Broadcasting Service. So in the process, it was the same stations, the same production companies, but it was a new leadership. So the idea was you had to come up with shows that would appeal to the public and would be educational, but wouldn't be communist. Get Congress off your back.
Okay.
So right around that time, they came up with 2 shows, one more sciencey than the other. They came up with Nature, which just became like the standard for nature documentaries for the next 40 or 50 years. And the other one was called Nova, and it was produced by a PBS station in Boston called WGBH, Greater Boston Harbor is what it stands for. And basically Nova was kind of like 60 minutes for science. But what it did was it would take a particular scientific topic and it would examine it for a solid hour. So it was like an hour-long science documentary every single week. Still making new episodes to this day, I believe, because it's become one of the tent poles of PBS. It's Nature and it's Nova. So, and it used to be Sesame Street, but so anyway, that's one that doesn't get a whole lot of thought when it comes to. It's more of an afterthought when it comes to kids because it's not designed for kids. Now there is one show that's actually older than Nova, a science show. And if I say it, some people are going to brighten up and other people will be like, who? Watch Mr. Wizard. Have you ever heard of Mr. Wizard?
Of course I heard Mr.
You've heard
Wizard.
of Mr. Wizard.
I don't know how come I
Can
didn't
you-
think about
Can
Mr.
you guess when Mr. Wizard started in television?
When? What
Yeah,
year?
give me a year. When do you think Mr. Wizard started on TV?
I'm going to say 70s.
You're going to say it's the 70s. A lot of people out there are going to say, no, it was the early 80s, because they remember there was a show called Mr. Wizard's World on Nickelodeon.
And that's the one I'm thinking of.
And basically Mr. Wizard is the kind of guy, essentially, he always had the reputation, he would go out and say, here, Billy, he would have a little kid who would be helping him, here, Billy, you hold this uranium isotope while I go warm up the fission material over here. And he would do these things that just seemed to be absolutely impossible, but he would show not only is it possible, he would pull it off on television and then explain the scientific principles behind it in a way that some of it would go over the kids' heads, but he never treated the kids like they were idiots. He would use the terms and everything, and if a kid didn't get it, then the kid could sit there, kids would actually take notes to see what terms they didn't understand and stuff, and they'd go look them up. At one point, there were almost 50,000 Mr. Wizard clubs in the country. There were classrooms, school classes would do it. And almost every elementary school classroom in America would have a Mr. Wizard club. Kids absolutely adored it because, like I said, he never talked down to them. He would show them all these really cool things you could do if you had the right materials, the knowledge, and he would explain how to do it and show them how to do it. This had, like I said, Mr. Wizard's World started on Nickelodeon in '83 and ran through '89, I think. He did a little version for teachers back in the '90s before he passed away. He actually started on NBC in 1951. He was the first real science show on television that I know of. But that's how long Mr. Wizard was kicking around, 4 decades, showing kids how to split the atom. So, but that just gives you an idea. And again, you can find Mr. Wizard stuff everywhere. Mr. Wizard's World is the later one in the 80s on Nickelodeon. Watch Mr. Wizard was the original one in black and white on NBC. So that gives you a rough idea of what science has been like on television. But the one thing that separated all of these shows from modern science is the fact that, actually, no, I'd say all of them did this. They all taught the scientific method. Okay, I'm going to do my own little Mr. Wizard here for a second. I'm not going to do any experiments or anything, but I'm going to explain something about what science is and is not. Okay, what all of these shows had in common is to show how you apply science to understanding some kind of mystery. Okay, the Bloodhound Gang even did it, although theirs was more Encyclopedia Brown. But there's a reference you ain't heard in a while. The scientific method is a way of looking at the world around you in order to understand how it works. The importance of the scientific principle is that, the scientific method is that what you do is you follow a set number of steps, okay? You come up with a hypothesis, which is an explanation for something that you see happen. And then you sit down and observe this phenomenon, make notes, take a lot of notes, and use those notes and those observations you make to compare that to your original thesis, your proposal. And then you change your thesis to fit the evidence that you're accumulating. And then you take that gives you a new thesis, and then you use that new refined thesis, and you continue the research. You keep looking for evidence, you keep looking for observations to support your new thesis. And then whatever your new thesis didn't explain, you develop a third thesis. And this is the scientific method.
Did you guys get all that?
Let me explain something. This is something that a lot of people who call themselves scientists these days, trust me, Mr. Wizard would punch these people in the face. The thing about the scientific method is Mr. Wizard would probably walk up and just punch some of these so-called doctors in the face. Like, Anthony Fauci. Believe me, Beekman would have given Tony Fauci a noogie by now. The rat would have given Dr. Fauci a kick in the butt by now. But it's the science that, as it goes today, is more of a faith-based religion than it is a scientific way of looking at the world. Science is about, believe it or not, it's at its very roots, it considered the world around us to be God's creation, and the way you get to know God better is to understand how He created these things and how these things work. God wants you to figure these things out, is what real scientists believe. So the scientist goes out and tries to understand it. What kind of principles did God use what are God's rules, essentially? How do you make the building blocks? How do you put them together so you can make things better and be better stewards of the world around you? That's the actual scientific method. But that all goes away now, I guess, because nobody in the science field really cares anymore, apparently.
Oh, that's not true. There's plenty of them out there, I'm sure. I don't.
Yeah, they're just pansies and don't want to speak up or nothing. So.
Well, is there any? Now, here's the big question: is there any educational shows that you watch now that you can give to people? To be like, hey, if you guys want to learn stuff, watch this or whatever.
Honestly, you know what the best ones I've seen lately have been?
What's that?
Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast will sit down. Mr. Beast will actually sit down and try to figure this stuff out, and then he does this goofy stuff. It's incredible because that's the way everybody reacts. But honestly, he is doing
$55 million if you can run over here and do this and do.
No. Well, that's the thing. Mr. Beast made his money by showing people how these things work and stuff, and by making things that don't seem like they should work. So
I was not expecting you to say Mr. Beast.
Now, I know a lot of people were wanting me to say Mythbusters, and honestly,
I literally just watched a Mr. Beast video where he had this guy. There was like a case that had like $55 million or something like that in a case, and he told this guy, "Here's some money. Around this case is boxes of dynamite. It's like you have to use this money to save this case of money,
right?
And when it blows up, you get whatever survived."
Mm-hmm.
So the guy went out and got mattresses, built walls, built like everything around it, and I'm just like, it's so stupid.
Yeah, hold on. What was Mr. Beast trying to instill in this guy? Analytics. Analyze the situation. Do some research.
Okay.
And then strategy. How would you do this? These are all scientific. These are all principles in the scientific method.
Sure.
So that's why everybody laughs at me. But honestly, Mr. Beast, and of course Mythbusters, and God bless Mythbusters. None of them are classically trained scientists. They are special effects guys. So they are more into the practical applications of things. So more often than not, if you're watching like the first 3 or 4 seasons of Mythbusters, whatever you're looking at is probably wrong. They got something wrong somewhere because they were constantly having to update in future episodes what they had already done and how they got it wrong because somebody who was watching, believe it or not, watching television said, they're full of crap, and then promptly not only told them about it, but proved it. And they were able to figure out a whole bunch of things.
That's true.
Don't even get me started on the JATO rocket, because it took them years to finally get that. Look it up. But it's... so I didn't get around to mentioning that. I did mention Mr. Wizard's World because it was a continuation of a network show. But I didn't really get into a lot of the cable shows. I didn't really get into the Science Channel or anything like that, or the Discover Channel or any of those Discovery Channel things like that, because those things most people know about now. If you want to know about them, you know about them. But Mythbusters, and probably Mr. Beast today would be what I would consider to be the spiritual successors of the science guys. So
my two, I got two.
yeah,
One of them I don't think is even on anymore. It used to actually come on the Weather Channel, believe it or not. It was called The Strangest Weather on Earth. And I loved watching that because there has been so many videos of like, oh, this is a ghost light up here on the top of the hill. You know, nobody can explain it. Or I saw this and this, you know, this must have been a UFO or something like that. In The Strangest Weather on Earth, I found out that weather can cause some of the most wildest and craziest stuff ever that makes people think something different, but it's actually just natural.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've never heard of a lightning ball.
yeah.
There's actually a video of a lightning ball, just this ball of electricity,
yeah.
just moving, going through a house, going like, just like passing by. And it's like, I've never seen that before, but that is the most coolest crap I've ever seen in my entire life. And now I know it exists. It's like, wow. So it's like a lot of these videos where they're like, what's causing this in the sky? What's causing this? And I'm like, I bet you there's something. It's like, it's not what you think. It has nothing to do with paranormal stuff. It has nothing to do with ghosts or aliens, but there's something. And if that show was still on, I bet you they would have proved it right there and then. And that's what I loved about it. My other one is something that just actually started back. There's these two guys named Shane Madej and Ryan, I can't remember his last name, but Ryan something. But they started this thing called Watcher. They used to work for another company, but they started this thing called Watcher, and they do ghost hunting. They do all this stuff. But they got this one show called Puppet History. And Puppet History is just this blue puppet, and it will have like two guests, and it will talk about things that happen in history. Things that they don't teach you in school. I've never heard of these things, but I've learned so much, and I love watching it because, one, it's really hilarious. Two, the way he makes this show is hilarious because he'll use like different voices and like pop-up characters and stuff like that. And he'll even write these stupid songs. Every show has a song from like a paddle from the Titanic. You know, it will have a song to sing about the Titanic. But because of this, I've learned so much. Like, the one that really stuck out to me was there is this woman that was pretty much survived so many tragedies. She was on the Titanic and survived. There was I think she was on a plane that crashed, survived. She was on a bunch of these things. And I'm just like, how can somebody actually like this exist? But they did. I learned that there was a queen of a country. I can't remember what the country is, but I learned about her. I learned about the maple disaster. Like, I've learned so many things that they don't teach me in school, but I'm like, this is fascinating stuff. I want to learn more. So if you want to learn about history and science and stuff like that, it's called Muppet History. It's on YouTube. The company's called Watcher, but can't miss it. It's a blue furry guy, but even he has his own story. So it's really good stuff, really good entertaining stuff. I love it.
And the most important thing to remember out of all of this is that, one, it's still maintaining the rigors of scientific method. And two, they're good storytellers, as we keep mentioning over on Geeking Out, which is a skill that is sadly lacking in a lot of people. So, any final thoughts on science shows, Chris?
Keep learning, because you never know. One day it will either save your life, come in handy, or something like that. It'd probably be more handy than what math would actually be, to be honest. I feel, in a way. I mean, anybody can count, but you got calculators on your phone. But like when it comes to science, it's like, oh, this is happening. I remember if I did this, it might save my life because this is going to blow. So if I like get in the bathtub, put a mattress over, I might survive the blast. Where'd you learn that at? Science, right? I don't know. Science. Science.
Who did that? And
Science. Oh,
Thomas Dolby. Before we go, a little disclaimer: don't do anything Chris told you to. Don't. If there's a gas leak in the house, please don't climb.
no,
That's don't climb the bathtub and cover yourself with the mattress.
That's not what
Escape.
I meant.
Okay. So. I know what you meant. That's why I sat here and put the disclaimer. So until next time, Spike,
Chris.
and we'll see you next
Oh, wait,
time.
wait, we didn't do that. Remember.
Oh, Gabe
Yeah.
Kaplan. That's who it was.
Bye.
So, we'll see you in the back racks. Tie y'all.
Bye.